Welcome to the Disruptive podcast by Minority Innovation Weekend. Minority Innovation Weekend is a weekend summit dedicated to aiding minority innovators launch tech-focused startups, exploring emerging technologies, and showcasing tech startups that have a minority founder or co-founder. During each episode, we will discuss innovation, news about tech startup, as well as the startup ecosystem, and interview people of color throughout the startup ecosystem. Welcome to the MIW Disruptive podcast hosted by Sir Walter and Jerome. Today, we're joined by the magnificent Michelle Dhansinghani. She is the CEO and founder of the DC-based consulting firm Elan Strategies. How you doing?
Hey, how's everyone doing? Well, very blessed. I feel privileged to be in this pandemic, having the opportunity to work from home. But really excited to talk to y'all about both small business and access to capital.
All right, sounds good.
Fantastic. Well, I'll go ahead and get started. What's the significance of the name of your company?
Yeah. Many years ago, I came across the word Elan, and I don't know. I looked it up and kind of thought. So it means enthusiasm, this like brightness. And when I thought about it, I was like, I need to have that word in my life somehow. And maybe I should name a dog that, or a child, or something that's important to me. And so when I was kind of going through my process of naming my company, so of course was thinking of like maybe a consulting firm, Michelle Consulting, Dhansinghani, kind of go with like a more traditional way. But then I was thinking, I want, when I interact with my clients, to feel this elan, this enthusiasm, this energy of the joy that it brings me when I have the opportunity to work and help them grow their business.
Okay. And so what is your company's vision?
Yeah. So the company's vision is really to lead with diversity and inclusion as a guiding principle. I think that so when we started the company, it kind of came after 2016 and Hillary Clinton lost the election. I gave my letter of resignation, and I was working for a large organization, and there was a ton of sexism and misogyny happening, not only in my personal life, but on a national stage where it was becoming normalized. And I decided that I wanted to be the change in the world, and I had the power in me to create that change. And the first way that I was going to do it was through business. And with the vision of not only being profitable as a company, but also good for community. So if you look at our team, we are mostly a all women of color run team, folks who are Afro-Latino, Black, folks who are Asian American, bringing the best of our community to service our clients.
Awesome.
All right, here's one. You mentioned access to capital. Why is it important to support minorities and women?
Yeah. So I'll tell you about kind of my like entrepreneurial journey and how and why that's important. So I have been around entrepreneurs all my life, right? My mom, when I was a little girl, had her own construction company and her own mortgage company. You see this pattern, especially for women and people of color, that because they were not accepted in mainstream spaces like corporate America or big business, they had to go and feed their families and create their own ways. And I think entrepreneurship has been that for many people of color and many women. And I saw that growing up. My mom was undocumented for very many years, and through like slowly starting cleaning houses, right? Her first hustle, to selling gold and perfumes in her car, to then starting her own business, running a construction company in a very male-dominated area, to now as an entrepreneur and having the opportunity to work with over 4.2 million Hispanic entrepreneurs through the U.S. Hispanic Chamber of Commerce, I saw that the biggest challenge that folks had to really scaling their business, especially if you look at a couple of statistics, Hispanic and minority-owned businesses have grow and they hit a $1 million mark. And a big part of that is access to capital, not having the funds so they can continue to invest in staff, invest in capacity training, or in any tools that the business has. And so being able to open up those, that one core part of the biggest challenge, which is access to capital to entrepreneurs, especially women and minority entrepreneurs, is not only good for communities locally, because it's seen that women and minority-owned businesses hire other women and other minorities to run their firms, but the money stays locally, right? So it's good also for local communities, and small businesses are the bloodline of this country.
Right, definitely. So like, you mentioned that you worked for the United States Chamber of Commerce, Hispanic Chamber of Commerce. What skills did you leverage from your experience there?
So I don't know if y'all have ever worked at a nonprofit, but this was like one of the most fascinating places to work. I started working there when I was, 23. So I was young, I was hungry, I had just moved to DC, and had been kind of in DC for a couple of months. And I had a financial services background, so like was pretty elite, right? I had worked for financial services doing private equity and hedge fund, and it was so hard to find a gig in DC because it's just such a competitive market, that when I landed at the U.S. Hispanic Chamber of Commerce, which I felt really called to my mission, right? Like as a Latina, empowering and providing the tools for Hispanic businesses to grow and all minority-owned businesses to grow is something that I has always been a big part of my mission. And so I landed at this organization, and then my first kind of part of the role there was working on the foundation side, so building relationships with local chambers of commerce across the country. So at the age of like 23, I was good friends, peers to CEOs of the Austin Hispanic Chamber or the DC Hispanic Chamber. So I was able to build really high level relationships, and then was moved over to our 501c3 side. And the business was the organization was run like a business, right? We, as an organization who advocated or advocates for Hispanic owned businesses and businesses in general, we wanted to understand the plight of entrepreneurs. And so all of our funding came from corporate partners. So then by that time I was probably 25. At 25, I was sitting on the other side of the CEO of BP America and putting together deals, or sitting down with the head of Bank of America's head of foundation, and building these peer-to-peer relationships and understanding how to build bridges between the communities that these companies served and what was their value proposition and why they should invest in these communities. And so I was able to leverage not only the relationships that I built, but also like the hustle that I had to learn, right? Because as a fundraiser, anyone that has ever done business development, you do a good job if you bring money in, right? So there's no like cloudiness. You either have money or you don't have money. So I had to learn that at a really early age. And so when I went on to start my business, I knew that the way that the chamber was doing fundraising was completely different than any other organization was doing fundraising, especially nonprofits. There's this mentality, and I think there's hopefully the work that we're doing is slowly changing it, but there's this mentality that because you're a nonprofit organization, it does not mean you cannot be profitable as a business, right? Because that profit just goes back to serve the people that your constituency. It goes back to your mission. And so it was really finding a way if an organization was focused on serving homeless communities across the country, we were able to tell a story to business and to corporate America of why it's important for people to have permanent housing, for people to have security. It's not the good thing to do, but it's good for the economy because people have jobs, they're productive members of society, it's good for your business. So I was able to translate a lot of those skills into the work that we're doing now with, again, that mission that we talked about earlier.
All right, Michelle, and when you're talking to clients or other founders, I guess what is more important, building the network or actually having access to venture capital or business loans?
Sure. So I think that there is this like misconception. So I think that there's this like beautiful enchantment around venture capital and like angel capital. There's this like sexiness around it, but not every business needs venture, or not every business needs access to capital. Like, for example, I'll talk about my business. We are a boutique consulting firm. I will never be your Walmart. That's not my goal as a business, but there are so many different there's a variety of funding out there, from crowdsourcing platforms that exist like GoFundMe, right, to things like one model that I have found super beautiful. For example, I'll give you an example. I was recently speaking to a woman named Jenny Kassan that looks at alternative funding, and she was sharing how she had a client, a grocery store in a local community that needed to grow their operations, wasn't looking at an aggressive growth, but really wanted to make sure that their company stayed around for a long time. So they asked their customers, the people that shop every single day at that grocery store, to invest in them. $1,000 checks, $500 checks, whatever that they could give. So that's also an alternative source, right? Then there's traditional banking, like going to your Wells Fargo and taking a bank loan. I think one of the things that communities of color especially, and that's why 2008 was such a big hit for us, was, and my mom did this as well, that's how she started her own construction company, a very capital intensive business, is that she took her home equity and took a loan out. And with that loan was able to start her business. So that's another way. And there's also credit unions that have been really helpful. So really understanding like what your need is for the business in terms of access to capital. And I hate saying this, but as an entrepreneur, you have to figure everything out. Like everything is equally as important. Like sure, you have to prioritize, but if you do need capital, if you need money to grow your business, you have to figure out how to do that at the same time as build your relationships and grow your business and run and keep the lights on, right? It's not always fun, but I don't think the entrepreneurial journey was made for everyone.
Right. So getting back to your business. So how do you pair nonprofits with corporate partners?
Yeah. So I think that one of the things we do really well is we listen. We have to understand what the organization's goals are, what their mission is, who they're serving, and then we think about, so we have over 450, access to over 450 corporate contacts, from corporate procurement to marketing, to supplier diversity, to government relations, to communications. So for example, we just started working with the Wireless Infrastructure Association, which is an organization that basically oversees everything and anything that touches the wireless industry, from folks who build cell towers to your iPhone that relies on connectivity in order to work, right? Mm-hmm. And so part of the work that we're doing there is ensuring that more diverse entrepreneurs in this industry are part of their supply chain, which is billions of dollars, and it's only going to continue to grow. And that's where we lean into. I just had a conversation with a good friend of mine, Brian Hall, who runs supplier diversity at Shell, and kind of shared with him the value proposition. So for them, understanding this organization needs to grow and wants to ensure that diverse entrepreneurs are part of the supply chain. So that's kind of the contact and the way that we're going to pair. But another example is we work with an organization called Voto Latino, and their focus is to increase the civic engagement participation of the Latino millennials. I think as an American, it is our responsibility to get out to vote, right? And so we are working, and especially in 2020, right? Like there are so many local and national elections that are so important. But right now we've worked with folks like the Walmart Foundation historically so we worked on a really big grant for community cohesion. After Trump got elected, there was so much fear in local communities, and Walmart saw that. And we were able to connect both Latino who has community organizations or a local impact around the country to funders like the Walmart Foundation on certain programs. So really listening and understanding and then connecting.
Michelle, in the last few years, what's kind of changed in the minority startup scene since you started?
I think that one of the things that I've seen that has been really interesting has been there are more and more people of color and women who are kind of leading. Like the disparity is still like stark. I think you can say this for every single space in this country, probably, right? But it's been powerful to see folks like Harlem Capital, who I think just raised $40 million, right? Like folks who got their first ever case study into Harvard Business School, who are leading these conversations now. You see slowly you're seeing, not fast enough for like my taste, but that there is an acknowledgement that demographic changes are happening in this country, whether you like it or not, right? The Asian American and Hispanic community, I think right now is the fastest growing demographic in this country. And by 2065, there will no longer be any minorities in this country. So numbers like that have investors and companies thinking on how do you make these investments in communities now. So it's been nice to see slow changes. They're not fast enough for me, but I think it's slowly happening. And I think conversations like the one we're happening and bringing awareness and also talking about our communities in a different way, right? Like I think in the Hispanic community, I see this often. There's this narrative, and in many communities of color where we are painted in mainstream media as undocumented or farm workers, which is part of our story, but we're also entrepreneurs. We're also teachers. We're also hosting podcasts. We're also having conversations about business in a different way. And I think the more that we're able to tell those stories, the more we're able to move the needle.
True. So now I have another venture capitalist question for you.
Sure. So
what financial information do you expect the startup companies to provide to venture capitalists?
Sure. So if you're at a stage where you're ready to seek access from venture, right? There's usually like a series of different raises. First, you have a friends and family raise, which is really interesting, where you go to your friends and family and ask them for money, and for folks, communities of color, like that's not, my mom can't write me a $50,000, like just that's not going to happen. So there are now things, actually the Maryland, the state of Maryland has a fund that's actually focused on what they're calling pre-seed funding, where the government is providing funding, and this fund is focused on communities of color and diverse entrepreneurs to get that friends and family stage. And then you start looking at angel investors, and when angel investors are going to give you funding, they'll do what they call a due diligence. Basically, they look through your kitchen sink, they make sure that all your finances are in order, that you have a plan of action, that you have budgets, that you have quarterly, an understanding of where you're going as a business. When you start getting into more institutional funding like venture, you need to have all of those ducks in a row. And by that time, the question of like what financial documents you need to have should have been answered 2 stages ago. But after you receive funding from, I just literally got off the phone with the head of Golden Seeds, who is an angel group that invests in diverse. Their requirement is that you either have to have a woman in the C-suite or as a founder, right? And so after they invest in the business, there's three big requirements. You have to have quarterly financials, annual financials, and a management letter, which is basically like, these are all the good things that have happened. These are some of the challenges that have happened, and this is what we need from you as investors.
All right, as an early stage founder of a company, when do you know that you have an idea that's worth investing in?
So one of the things that I have found has been that one of my dear friends, Anna Bermudez, who runs a company called Tag It. I met her through the U.S. Hispanic Chamber of Commerce, and she won a competition that they had like 3-4 years ago around women entrepreneurs. So her business from that point to now has changed 180, right? So I think that there has to be a couple of things that you look at as an investor, right? More than anything, I think you're going to invest in the entrepreneur and your management team, right? You invest because that means hard work, ethic, that means a good understanding of the industry, that means people who are dedicated and really passionate about the idea or the mission of the company. Then you're also going to look at the industry, right? Do you understand the industry pretty well? And if there are strong trends in that industry, and then if it's interesting to you, because if you're talking as an angel investor, it's your money, right? But if you're talking as a fund, now you're responsible to a lot more folks. And so those are kind of the things that I would look at.
Okay. So for you, like when you're trying to select clients to work with, like what are your 3 main criteria?
So we just we just grew the team. We just hired 2 really brilliant people, the beginning of when all this crazy pandemic stuff started happening. And we are having a conversation internally, like what are the things that we care about in terms of clients? And so the main one that we're looking at is, so as I shared earlier, we are all a very diverse team, and we want to make sure that one of the biggest challenges that we see not only in the private sector as like entrepreneurs looking for funding, but also in the nonprofit sector in terms of access to capital and funding are networks. And so we have the networks. We have over 400 corporate contacts, and like, how do we leverage those networks for good? And so I think the one criteria that we're having is, as a company, as an organization, they have to be servicing the communities we care about. Communities of color, LGBT communities, women, folks with disabilities, people who have been marginalized, and we want to use and leverage our network to create access to these funding opportunities. So simple, one solid one.
All right. Speaking of that, as far as your location, right now you're located. Which geographic areas do you support?
Yeah, so most of the folks that we're working with are national organizations. I just moved to Baltimore, actually, which I'm really excited about. Have loved this community so far. It's been really interesting to see how Baltimore is looking at development in a very sustainable way. So more slowly, but like very focused on bringing other folks up. So I love that. I just started working for the first time with a like kind of a non-traditional client that is based in Baltimore, that's servicing Baltimore with a plan to go nationally. They're not a nonprofit organization. They're an organization called Parity. They focus on affordable housing. They're doing community development in West Baltimore in a way where they're buying 9 blocks and they're rehabbing those houses, ensuring that it's affordable housing. But at the same time, which I think is brilliant, they're ensuring that they're investing in the parks and in the actual community, bringing business and commerce to the area. So to answer your question, it's mostly a national organizations that have been scaled that really need access to this next stage of corporate contacts and unrestricted funding. But we are, because now as a Baltimore community member, like wanting to invest in our community and kind of leverage our relationships.
So what's like one thing you would tell an entrepreneur to do and not to do?
So one of the things I would tell an entrepreneur to be intentional and to be thoughtful. I think that goes such a long way. And like, I know because I experience it every single day. I've been on calls since like 9 a.m. this morning. I'm tired. I want to have a cocktail. Like I'm ready, right? But just taking the time to really be thoughtful and thinking of the things that are important to your business and how it's going to impact you makes a huge difference. And the thing I would tell an entrepreneur not to do, I don't know how to phrase this exactly, but one of the challenges that I've had is, so I will like hands down say that I am not an expert in all pieces of my business. Like I hate accounting. I don't want to do that. I think my time is better spent growing the business, working deals instead of on QuickBooks or sending out invoices, but it's such a big part of it. And one of the mistakes that I made and it has been like a learning mistake has been, I'll talk about two mistakes. One has been not contracting people or services out with the accounting piece and not really being on top of every single piece, like trusting someone with your baby when you should know every single step of the way. And it's a hard lesson learned, but it's something that I learned early on. And then the second thing that I would tell an entrepreneur not to do or warn them a little bit is hiring has been a really interesting thing. Hopefully you can hear from my voice or the things that I'm sharing with you that I am an enthusiastic person and like slightly positive. So I remember early on hiring my first full-time staffer, and this like brilliant woman of color who like I invested a ton of time in her and was really excited, and she just was not a good fit for the firm. And it was really hard for me. And I think that she understood who we were as a company and like what our values were and like how we had a limited budget for this position and needed to have output from it. And so she eventually gave her letter of resignation in because she knew she wasn't a good fit. But I tried so hard to make her a good fit, right? I was like, she just needs more mentorship. She needs more one-on-one. She needs more capacity. And she just was not. And so being able to identify that early on, and I remember talking to my mentor about it afterwards, because I saw it as a personal failure, right? And she was like, well, that's an expensive mistake that you'll never make again.
Michelle, is there anything that we didn't ask that you wish we would have asked?
So I would love to talk a little bit. I know that we kind of had a pre-conversation a little bit. And one of the things that I would love to share is, so you, I think, had mentioned why is it important to have like investors of color and women of color on the investing side. And so I'd love to kind of talk a little bit about that, because I would love to share like stories of two really powerful entrepreneurs that I've met along the way and have heard their stories. And so one of the challenges I think that we are seeing, especially if you look at VC or angel, or especially if you look at venture capital, is that the people who are investing, who are investors, are like older white males, right? And when you're thinking of products that, especially as our demographics in this country are changing, you're thinking of the people who are creating those products, they don't look like the investors on the other side. And I'll give a really good example. So there's a woman out of Miami, Florida area called Crafting Your Occasions. Her name's Lynette. And so she started this company. She was kind of an event planner and then was planning family birthday parties. She's an Afro-Latina. And so her kids and her friends' families don't look like the white children spaces who are on mainstream like party supplies. So she started these like beautiful Black mermaid products and has now grown. And when she has had challenges marketing herself and kind of telling her story and securing investment dollars. But when you think of it, as someone who is an investor, like why would that be appealing? So I think it's a huge missed opportunity when you look at these hard numbers, like the ones I mentioned, right? Like the Asian American and Hispanic community in this country are the fastest growing. There will no longer be any minority groups by 2065. Like there have to be products that service these things. Or one of my favorite funds is called Portfolio. And a couple funds ago, they had a round that was focused on funding femtech, so feminine technology. And one of the things that they looked at, I don't know where the stage of this business is. I know they do really early stage funding, but they looked at a mesh for women, a vaginal mesh for women. So after, I don't have any children, but so after women have children, there's like a leakage that happens. And so this company started, women are also 51% of the US population. Right? A strong part of that population is having children and having these very similar challenges. And so if you are a man, you would have never known that, right? Unless you're having conversations with your partner or your sister or your aunt or whatever about this. And so their hope was to be able to take that mesh and have other like medical applications, but things like that are being underfunded. When I'm thinking about it, right? Like as an investor, if everyone's buying apples and everyone's going to need pears, I'm going to start investing in pears. But if apples are the only things that I see, that's not the thing that I'm going to invest in. So I think it's a huge missed opportunity. And as we are diversifying and building wealth, I think as we're building wealth as communities of color and as women, like we are going to see more investors. I think there's also stronger pipelines to ensure there are more folks that look like us in VC. But I'm very hopeful.
All right. Well, thank you very much for joining us. How can people get in contact with you?
Yeah, absolutely. So they can follow me at CEO_Vibras, VIBRAS. Also on Twitter. And then they can also shoot me an email at michelle@elanstrategies.com. And any way that I can be helpful, I can introduce you to folks. If you're an entrepreneur and just want to pick someone's brain, I'm here to help.
That's awesome. And also, you're going to become one of the podcast team, right?
Yes, I'm really excited about that. Oh, that's so good to hear. Yeah. So when I first met Jerome, I was like, listen, super excited that you're having these conversations. I think that they're really smart. I think that one huge opportunity there is to have a woman a part of these conversations. So that makes me really happy.
All right. That's what I'm talking about.
Awesome. We're going to be a powerful team.
Right. There you go.
Yeah.
Well, thank you once again.
Yeah, thank you too. Happy Friday. I hope you enjoy a nice walk or just a little bit of relaxed time.
All right, you too.
All right, y'all take care.
Bye.
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 That wraps up this episode of the Disruptive Podcast by Minority Innovation Weekend. If you haven't already done so, please subscribe. Check us out online at www.minorityinnovationweekend.org and connect with us on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and LinkedIn. MIW 2020 is coming up on Saturday, October 3rd to the 4th, so head on over to www.minorityinnovationweekend.org and register for MIW 2020 today.